In this video, I'm going to go over how the new COVID vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna, how they are functioning to make you immune to the COVID virus. They're actually using what your cells already do to do that and to make you immune. So let me review here really quickly. You should recognize this picture from the previous video on protein synthesis. The instructions for proteins, genes, are located in the DNA in the nucleus. But when the production of that protein is necessary, what will happen is the DNA will unwind, mRNA will make a copy of those genes, a copy of that gene. The DNA is going to stay, the original blueprint for the protein is going to stay in the nucleus, but this messenger RNA is going to leave the nucleus, go to the ribosome, and from those instructions for that protein, it's going to produce or synthesize that protein. What these new vaccines do, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, is they use the fact that your body uses mRNA to then construct proteins. So here is the coronavirus. Okay, here's the coronavirus. It has some proteins on it. It has some proteins on it. How a virus infects you is that actually it's going to use this spike protein. It's going to bind to receptors on your cells. And what's going to happen is when it does that, it tricks the cell into letting the virus in. So the cell has been tricked, the virus gets into the cell, it then injects its genetic material into the cell's genetic material, which then causes that cell to make millions and millions of the virus, and then that cell kind of mini explodes. The viruses go throughout the body, they then trick other cells to let them in, and they trick those cells into making more of themselves, okay, more of the virus. And then that happens throughout the body, and that is what makes you sick, okay? That is what makes you sick. That process is actually described in another video on receptors, which you'll watch in the near future. How do you vaccinate against something like this? The goal of a vaccine is to get your body to produce an immune response to a virus or bacteria, but without making you sick, without giving you the virus, okay? Without giving you the virus or the bacteria. So again, the goal is to induce an immune response against a virus or bacteria, but without making you sick, okay? Without making you sick. The most common way in the past to make a vaccine is that you mutate, or you take a segment of a virus, you attenuate it, you do something so that when you inject it into the person, it will develop an immune response against that virus or bacteria, but not make you sick. Okay, it preps you for that bacteria or virus, but it doesn't make you sick. So that's kind of the I won't say old-fashioned, but the most common type of vaccine that we have, and they have been proven very effective over time. There's actually going to be vaccines like that for COVID that are coming down the road. And again, this was made in January of 2021. So something I say can change in the near future, since we're just learning about this vaccine and about the virus. What they have done with this new mRNA vaccine, okay, is they're now again using what your body already does to make you immune to this virus. Okay, so for each of these proteins, there is genetic information that the virus has that's going to allow it to produce or make that protein. So what scientists have done is they've taken this spike protein. This is the protein that allows the virus to get into your cells. They have the genetic instructions for the spike protein. They actually have it for the whole virus, but they use the genetic instructions for the spike protein, and they produce in the lab an mRNA, a messenger RNA that has the instructions for this spike protein, okay, for the spike protein. They then take the mRNA, they wrap it into a lipid coat, and this is what's injected into your arm. What will happen is when it's injected into your arm, it'll travel throughout your body, and this lipid coat will be attracted to certain types of white blood cells. And white blood cells are what is going to induce an immune response. So it gets into the cell. Now you've got this mRNA, which is the instructions for the spike protein. It heads to the ribosomes, or runs into them. When it runs into a ribosome, what's going to happen is, just like here, okay, where this mRNA came to the ribosome, it made the instructions for a protein. In the case of the vaccine, it's going to make spike proteins. Okay, it's going to make the spike proteins of the COVID virus. Now, these spike proteins will not make you sick because they aren't the whole virus. But what they will do is they will allow your body to induce an immune response against the virus, because we got the spike protein. It thinks it's the virus. The spike protein alone is not going to make you sick, but it's going to induce an immune response against the virus. So what will happen is, and this is beyond what we have talked about, there are two prongs of your immune system, cell-mediated and antibody-mediated. We'll get to those later in the semester, so just trust me on this. But what you do is you get a two-pronged attack against the spike protein. You get the production of antibodies, which most of you have heard of. Antibodies are going to attack the virus or attack the spike protein. And you also get the production of different types of white blood cells, which would recognize the spike protein of the virus. So again, they inject into your arm this mRNA gets into white blood cells, and basically you're developing a two-pronged immune response to the COVID virus. But it doesn't make you sick because it's just the spike protein. So what then happens is you now have this immune system that is ready if it is exposed to the virus. So let's say you do get exposed to the virus, okay? You do get exposed to the virus. Those antibodies that I talked about and those white blood cells that I talked about recognize it because it's seen the spike protein before, and it attacks it, and it makes it much, much less likely that you're going to get sick from it. And if you do get sick, it's going to be, from what they've shown so far, much less severe, okay? Much less severe. So again, these vaccines have used what your body has already can do to then make you immune to the coronavirus, okay, to the coronavirus. Now, a couple things about the vaccine and about just vaccines in general. What they have found with the Moderna and the Pfizer is that 2 doses makes you much more immune, or your immune system much more efficient than just 1 dose. 1 dose does help, but the second dose is really going to make a big difference. Now, you've probably heard or read that these vaccines have to be kept very, very cold, especially the Pfizer. The reason for that is mRNA is not a very stable molecule. It will break apart very easily. So to keep that from happening, that's why they have to be kept very, very cold. Okay, why they have to be stored in a very cold environment. The ones that are the vaccines I talked about that are just mutated or attenuated viruses, they do not have to be kept as cold. Okay, they do not have to be kept as cold. And for some of them, they only may take one dose instead of 2. All right, so some people are talking about what are the symptoms after you get the vaccine. There have been cases where people have they go into an allergic response to it, which can cause problems. They think that's coming from these little things called nanoparticles that are part of this lipid coat. I'm not completely sure on that. So that is a side effect for some people. It is very rare, but again, they do have to consider that. So they're talking about people with severe allergies may want to wait until another vaccine comes down the road. Now, people talk about, their arm is sore. Well, you just got a shot in it. That would explain that. You may also show things like the chill, like you almost have in a fever. You may show an immune response, especially after the second dose. That doesn't mean you've been infected. It just means your body is responding in a way that's not bad, okay? That's not bad. So you may feel crappy the next day. Most people that I've seen haven't, but it's going to happen. It doesn't mean it's made you sick. It's just having a fever and those kind of things are just a way that your body is prepping for a future exposure to that virus. So do not let those side effects deter you. That happens with the flu vaccine. That happens with several vaccines. It just means it's a symptom, a good symptom, that your body is revving up its immune system to deal with the virus if it's ever exposed to it. Okay, if it's ever exposed to it. Okay, so that is the basics, the very basics of how the mRNA vaccines are working. They seem new, but this idea of using mRNA, synthesized mRNA, synthetic mRNA that is made to produce specific proteins has been around. It's just this COVID pandemic has given a great opportunity to use it in a large fashion to help fight off the pandemic. Okay, to fight off the pandemic. It will probably be used in future vaccines, and it also may be used in the treatment of cancer and other diseases. If we can get your cells to make certain proteins, that may benefit it in terms of being able to fight off certain diseases. Okay, that is the end of this. This terminology, some of the stuff I talked about, we'll come back to this later in the semester and then relate it, and you'll have a better understanding of the immune system. So some of what I've talked about will make a little more sense. All right, we'll see you soon.